I've never heard a technical talk about REST be introduced as exciting before, so now that there's that to live forward to. So, that is me. I am not a developer. I am a competent scripter. In case anybody wonders, I'm also not Ryan Reynolds' brother. I get that confused a lot for some odd reason. Legal is fun to deal with. There's our disclaimer. Feel free to read it as you want. So, what is REST? I always like when we talk about something to agree what we're talking about. It's an application programming interface. It's got some constraints. That's what it stands for. There's a lot of really brilliant guys. Royal Fielding, you can see I kind of put a little celebration on his name, was the guy who designed it. It's more a set of architectural constraints that design how this is used. It can give you its data and formats. I'm not going to go into what all these various means. But the big thing about REST is that every statement, every request has to have all the information to process it. You don't connect and then use that information again. So every REST call you make has to have the authentication, the data required. You can use data from that in another request, but you have to bring that in. So it's not something that builds on itself. So, a couple of things to note, and I will say as I'm in here, these are things I had to learn as I got started with Cumulocity. Again, I'm a scripter, I'm not a developer, and Software AG's got great documentation on their entire REST stack, but it assumes a certain base level of knowledge that I did not have. As a scripter, I didn't know anything about calling REST, so I had to figure a lot of this stuff out by myself, and that's where I'm taking this talk, is to help us get to that point where we can read the documentation and have it make sense. So there's a couple things that we do, typically with REST. There's a lot more calls than this, but these are the important ones. Post puts data in. That and put get confused pretty regularly. Post creates a new record, put just updates a record. The way I keep it straight is on American fences, you see a sign that says post no bills. It means don't put anything on here. That's what post does. It makes a new record. So if you try to update an existing record and use a post, that wipes out what's there and puts the new data in. So if you don't have everything in there you want to record, it's going to wipe that out for you. Get, if you don't know what get is by now, I would suggest talking to your high school English teacher and work on that. Delete, again, that one you probably can figure out on your own. These are part of what we in security call a CRUD action suite. I don't come up with these acronyms. I'm glad somebody did. So, there's some great tools you can use with REST. The first is Postman. You can download there off that link. I like to use Postman to create the query and figure out how it works and what kind of data I'm going to get back. It's a really simplistic tool. You can download it, install it. Typically, you don't need rights from your IT shop to get that installed. They'll let you do that. But that I use a lot just to get started and figure out what the query looks like, what data I'm getting back in there. Python, that's the language I use to script with. If anybody that wants to use that, there's a lot of information on the web about Python. Great user communities. Stack Overflow has all kinds of data. And being a scripter, of course, I copy stuff and paste it, but it's really a good way to do that. Curl is a really neat tool if you want to use your DOS box to manage Cumulocity. If you got a OS2 computer sitting around somewhere that hasn't been turned to a museum yet, curl lets you use all of that. And many examples from Software AG's website use curl in their examples. So understanding that, which I won't go into today, will help you to understand and write these queries as well. But if you look at their API examples, here's where you can get this. That's got a lot of great calls and a lot of really good starting points to manage your suite, to pull data out, to put data in. So I really suggest don't start completely from scratch. Install Postman, install Python, and use those examples that Cumulocity provides. So, setting up Postman, I do application packaging. If you want it delivered, I can tell you how to do that. Download it, import the collection, and set up your environments. So what I do here is we've got, I looked at this slide and I put something together. Okay, so here's our environments. So what I do is I created one called the CRM Sandbox. And you want to just set up what's called the URL. That's what you're going to use. Otherwise, if you don't use that URL variable, you've got to type every environment you're connecting up to out. In my situation where I've got about 20 environments, that gets really long, really fast. But if you can switch between environments, just change this button here. That makes your life a lot easier. So set up your URL. I deliberately obfuscated this, but it's the environment.iotnonprod.bsci.com. So you can set that up and make life easier on yourself using this. Import the collections. That creates a little collections icon off on the left here. And then you can see there's got all these various Cumulocity training, whatever I've set up. So that lets you bring those queries in, use them, and start making sense out of your Cumulocity environment. There we go. Single sign-on is a great tool. If you have an enterprise team that manages single sign-on, you want to use that with your Cumulocity platform, because then to log in, us as platform admins, we don't need to manage a local user database, which will drive you insane fairly quickly. So set up your single sign-on in Postman, get your enterprise team to help you do that. And then what you can do is in Postman, set up your authorization, and these are all the fields that exist in Cumulocity. So copy that data into these fields, and then you can just use these tokens, and then you don't have to manage local users, which need to be audited, they need to be managed. You have to make sure that if somebody leaves the company, you delete them out of your environment. From the security perspective, it's a big mess. Don't deal with that. And once you do this, you can get this set up, and you can see here that it creates these tokens. It's a bearer token, and you just name the token of the date, and that lets you use that date because these tokens expire. Otherwise, you wind up logging in forever, and security Dave would hate doing that. So grab these fields out of your single sign-on configuration Cumulocity, bring these into Postman, and that'll make your life a lot easier. And when you do that, you can generate a new token in Postman. There's a button you click on. I've obfuscated the data here, but that generates this access token, which has all this information in there. And if you're curious about it, jwt.io, just open that in your browser, and that tells you all the information that's in there, in that encrypted format. I've obviously changed a couple of things, so I'm not showing any big secrets here, thankfully. But that gives you some info if you're really curious about what the Java or the JSON Web Token does. That was fun, wasn't it? We can have fun in a technical talk. But we want to do something. We want to use this information to actually do something productive. And since my boss doesn't think Tetris is productive, he wants me to actually imitate and manage the platform. So this is one of the examples of the REST examples that we've got. I want to do a get from the inventory, grab a manage object, and this is a specific object here. That's called the endpoint that I'm trying to get. And in a get, you're requesting information out of the platform. So there generally isn't much you put in the body of a get request. It just says, get me the information about this. If you want to click on the headers, that's information for the query, but Postman generates this. This is all that information here. Again, it's authentication data, response format, and you can see here this is one of those form methods I talked about. And when I click on, what's that what I clicked on? There's a button, there's a button here you click, a little blue button to run the query. I wound up editing that out. But when you click on that button, there we go. That gives you some information. The important thing is your response code. That tells you what the server did when it received your request. I got a 200, response is okay. So there's data, it's correctly formatted, and it gave me something back. Now there are a couple ways you can view that information in Postman. This is the preview mode, which is somewhat darker here. It gives you it in this format. There's also raw, which isn't as readable, but it condenses it so you can see more of it. I like the pretty mode, and it's actually called pretty mode. Don't ask me why. But that lets you actually see it in a more human-readable format. It's all the same data. It doesn't matter what you use when you start scripting these out, but pretty mode lets you see it in a way that makes a little bit more sense and can figure this out. This is JSON data, which you can see has a key and then some data with it. We'll talk about that in a moment. Response codes, and I talked about that we got that response code. There's a lot of them. You don't need to know all of them. The big things we can see here are the ones that really matter. 200, we got the data back. 201 you use with a put or a post that it got created. 400, you want to avoid those because the server can't understand it because you goofed up doing something, which I really hate when I get those. 403 is easy to solve because you don't have writes. 404, that one's been around forever. And the 500s are that the server can't request. Something's wrong with the server. You have to deal with that. You can read all of them if you want at that web link down there. And my personal favorite is response 418. I've never gotten it. I don't know if Software AG's built that one in, but yes, you can get a response that says, I'm a teapot. Okay, so I've queried something, I got some data out, but that's not really going to help me much. I know that piece of information, but I want to do more with it. So, and sometimes that's too much data. But what we can do, we can pass parameters to get better responses from the queries. The question mark lets you add a parameter that you want to use, and you can use the ampersand to pass multiple parameters, so you can start getting more useful data and improve your signal-to-noise ratio. So we start out getting events. That gets all the events, and at the time I wrote this, that was 220,000 pages with 5 events per page. That's a lot of events. And quite frankly, if I'm looking for a specific event, that's a lot to slog through to find what I'm looking for. So I need to trim that down before I start doing things with it. The page size I can change to 100, so at least I don't get so many pages of events. And if I want to know how many pages of events I've got, I use the with total pages equals true, and that helps me figure out what kind of size of response body I'm getting. So I add those. So now instead of get URL events, question mark page size equal 100, so set the page to 100. With total pages equal true, how many pages of data am I getting? Which cuts my total pages down to 11,000 only. So, I no longer have 250,000 pages of data. I've only got 11,000. That's still I believe the correct term is metric crap ton of data to go through. So, and it's still a lot of crap to read through. And I only wanted to see events on January 29th and January 30th of 2024. So anything outside those dates, I want to exclude. I'm not going to look at them anyways. Let's get rid of junk. So what I'm going to do is do the events, set my date from, and you can do some research and find the parameters that get accepted. Case is critical when you're using REST. So make sure you get your capitals and your lowercase letters correct. Cumulocity stack uses what's called camel case, lower first letter, capital letter for each subsequent word. That's very important to do that. Also, since we Americans, I think, are the one who came up with this, we use this odd American date format. To my non-European counterparts, sorry, but we did it so we get to set the rules. But there, so you can see, start with the date from January 29th, date to January 30th, 100 events per page. How many total pages do I have? I'm still slogging through a crap load of data, but now I'm down to 47 pages only instead of 1,100. So we're getting better. And how do I know that? Because total pages down here says it's 47. And we can see pairs of data, some information here. Time is Zulu time, and this is where I give the English credit. They were the ones that came up with the standard of using Greenwich Mean Time and Zulu time, so they get to call that Zulu time. Hooray for the English. And Cumulocity calls these keys fragments. I don't know why, that's what they call them. So what is this stuff? There's all this stuff we got, and for a non-developer, this can be somewhat intimidating. In, pardon me, Python, this is called a key-value pair. The key is the name, the data is the value. So if I'm looking for a device, what's its name? The name is the key, the value is the information we got back. When you start running queries and scripting this, that's very important to know what those are. I talked about Zulu time, talked about the fragment. And here is, we can see this data comes in a very specific format. We've got a key, the colon, which shows you're setting up the key and value pair. And then the value is this set, marked by the curly bracket. That's how JSON data works. It always comes back in JSON formatted data from Cumulocity. The challenge always is when you make a query to get the JSON format right. That's typically where most of your errors happen when you try and do this. Okay, now I'm looking for something specific. So I've got 47 pages of data at 100 items per page. but I know what I'm looking for. And what I want to find is this event type called BSCI underscore get available software packages. A device is checked in, it wants to see what it's looking for. So I'm looking for these events. We can see here this type, there's my key, here's my value. What am I getting there? So I go down here and I use the key in my query. So get the date, which we already talked about, and type equal get available software packages event with total packages equals true. So you can query in any of these things, any of these keys in the REST request to get this data back. Some of these you wouldn't talk about. I mean, if you really want to know the time an event happened, you can do that, but usually you're just looking for either the source or the type of request you're looking for. Now I'm down to 12 pages of events. So I had 250,000, I'm down to 12. So someone wanted to know when did this device check in. I'm getting to the point where I can find this. I still don't want to slog through 12 pages at 100 per of events. Machines are really good at doing repetitive, stupid work. I'm not. I'm good at telling machines what to do. In Postman, this button is gold. This will help you make your life a lot easier because that gives you the code to run that request in a script. Now, there's all kinds of ways we can do this. Again, if you want to run this on your BOS box, you can grab curl. Python, that's the scripting language I use. Use requests, not the old HTTP client. And you can see we've checked that. So I grab this code, which gives me this bit of gibberish. But this is the code that I can run and put into my Python environment and start repeating this and trimming it down and doing something with the data. So we get the URL. That's my environment. My boss asked that I not put up our environments here on the screen, so that'll be your data. But this string here, environment IoT.bsci.com, that's that URL field we talked about earlier. Again, date from, date to, page size, type is get available software packages event with pages equals true. This is the information that's required, and what I do is I do a request.get, puts all that stuff in, and make sure that when we do this, add HTTPS or you're going to get an invalid URL. It's one of the things Postman doesn't do right, but that returns a string, which is a series of letters and numbers. To getting a string and dealing with that. So I made a function here which takes this information, the URL, the authorization, and the payload, and grabs it. And now I can see that if I do this and do these imports, and there's all this information about Python, you can grab it online, and this gives me a dictionary. We talked about that earlier, that's key value pairs. Now I can query that dictionary and get the information out that I'm looking for. Come on, there we go. Which looks like this. Again, it's not pretty, but we can see the keys, the values, all of this, the source, where this came from, the URL we're calling, all the other information here. It's not pretty, but what I can do is grab all this. This is just code I typed in. I take the response. It's a dictionary. If I want to find the keys to the dictionary, and we talked about key value pairs, next is what's next. Self is what I called. Events are the events that are written. That's what I care about. Statistics is information about the query. So what I want to do is take that response, grab the events, and that starts giving me the events that we've got now, which is a list of dictionaries, which is kind of cool. Python does really neat stuff like that. Okay, custom measurements. So we manage medical devices. We want to know how these devices are doing and what the story is with them. And I realize I don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. So we want to count how many times they run. What we can do is put this information into this JSON formatted in a post, and the slides will be available if anyone wants to look at that. I ran this, did the send, created it, gave me a 201 result. And now I can either do a get of all the results measurements, or I can just do this and get just the BSC duty cycles I created, which we can see here is the type of BSC duty cycles. And last but not least, I can filter, which is also a great way to get information, just to cut slogging down through that stuff. A filter lets you grab information that otherwise you can't get based on the type of event or the key. So in this case, I'm looking for one where the BSI location equals the USA. And that gives you a smaller data set to work with. Spaces aren't processed well, but if you need to encode it, there's a good way you can grab that online and do that. So I realized I've gone through a lot kind of quickly. I hope I've been as exciting as this was promised. We can do a lot with REST. It can be challenging to learn to do and do it well. Questions, additions, feel free to reach out. If there's any developers, you've probably got a better way of doing it. Great, let me know. Disagreements or complaints, send those to null@bitbucket.com where they will be promptly dealt with. That's what I got.